Hello, Ale. So I am back, and I'm here to talk about memory markers or monuments to the Second World War and public memory, Norwegian memory. Hopefully you can hear me. We've got the Norwegian evangelicals out this Sunday morning playing some American country evangelical music here outside of Osvald, the historical Grand Central Station, where we have the Osvald Memorial. And I think what's interesting about this monument is not just the monument itself, which if you can see is a hammer smashing a swastika over a rock, a giant boulder, which is just, it's awesome. But what's really interesting is the public discourse that surrounded this monument when it was unveiled on May 1st, 2015. First, you'll notice the date, the International Workers' Day on May 1st. Historically, a lot of Norwegian resistance memorials are unveiled on 17. Mai, on the national holiday of independence. And so I've already spoken of several times how within Norwegian memory, the nation and the idea of the state as this resistance actor during the Second World War really absorbs a lot of the resistance movements, both in how they're presented, but then also which resistance movements get remembered. And the Osvald Group was a communist resistance group. And so if you ask a lot of folks if you've heard about Osvald Group, many haven't. And if they have, strangely enough, they haven't heard of this monument, even though it's been here for a decade. And some of the primary critiques about this monument in 2015 when it was unveiled boiled down to the fact that Osvald is itself a monument, is a historical building, and that shouldn't be distracted from. That was an argument that the Antiquarian Society made. There was also an argument that monuments should reflect the architecture of the buildings that they adorn. And then there was broader questions around how monuments should engage with public space, as well as the political process in terms of deciding what goes where and what is allowed to be in public space. And so within all of these, there is contention for public space, and anytime there is contention for public space, there's also a contention around public imagination and public memory. In this case, how the public imagines and remembers not only the Second World War, but resistance within that war and broader resistance towards authoritarianism, and in this case specifically fascism and Nazism. And so I want to first talk about the idea that Osvald is the sacred space, and that this monument to the Osvald Gruppen is profane in some sense. So what's interesting now, and you can't see it here, but what adorns now the Grand Central Station is a comfort hotel and an Italian restaurant. Nothing wrong with hotels or Italian restaurants, but what's interesting is this national building that's supposed to be this historical monument in and of itself, is this sacred space, is now this site of consumption and tourism, i.e. market capitalism, whereas this monument is a communist monument. So it offers a direct threat to this future-facing value system around the capitalist market economy, right? The second primary critique was that given that this is so, lack of a better term, it is a loud monument, and it's nowhere near to any of the historical buildings which surround it. And something that's interesting about a number of the monuments to the Second World War in that they do mimic the national architecture. And so I've talked a lot about how the state absorbs the memory of these resistance groups, not just in what's highlighted and who's highlighted and how, but also even in their aesthetic production, right? And so if you have these monuments which mimic a national architecture, even within the visual culture, they become absorbed within this national language. And so you have here this monument that refuses to be pacified, that refuses to be absorbed within a national aesthetic. And I think that both speaks to the history of the group as a group that was either decentralized or often receiving its orders from the NKVD as this communist collective that refuses to be absorbed by the democratic state. And I think that is this fascinating site of contention, but also this really incredibly important memory in terms of the fact that Norwegian resistance was not simply about a resistance against Nazi Germany and occupation. It was also a fight for a future Norway. And what would that look like? What kind of political system would be central in the Norway that existed after occupation? And then there's also the argument around what is the process for deciding what goes in public space. And I think inherent in that, and again, so much of these critiques were riddled with coded language, right? But what's central to that is that the political process which decides what is remembered and how. And I think it really speaks to the fact that so much of the memory of the Second World War, or wars generally, particularly, not just in the West, but like how conflict and resistance is remembered, often follows a political process to which it's sanctified, and it's watered down, and it is absorbed within the state, and can be considered a state project retrospectively, even if it wasn't, right? And so I think those are some of the things that I'm really thinking about with this monument. And I want to read the quote from Osvald on the side, who was the leader of the Osvald group. And it says, "Det var ved å kjempe for friheter, for alle land, for alle klasser, for alle mennesker." It was essential that we fought for freedom, for all countries, for all classes, and for all people. And so even in the words of the group, you have this assertion of collective liberation that expands beyond the Norwegian border, whereas historically, the centralization of Milorg and Oslo Gang and some of these groups that were supported by the government in exile in the UK, or were trained by British Special Forces, supplied by British Special Forces, given their direction from either the British, the US, or from the government in the UK, is that project was about reinstalling a democratic state, whereas Osvald Gruppen asserts a much more collective mode of liberation through resistance. And I think the last thing that I want to say about it, and I didn't mention this, but that the Osvald Gruppen is famous for being the first actor to carry out a sabotage against the occupying Nazis. And the reason this is outside of Osvald, Holland, is because the first act was on February 2nd, 1942, where they set a bomb off here at Grand Central Station. And it was in protest of Vidkun Quisling, who was the minister-president, who was installed by the Nazis. He was the leader of the National Samling, which was the Norwegian Nazi Party, and they were protesting his installation. And so initially, this sculpture existed much more central outside of the building, and has since been moved. Due to the ordinance, it couldn't be moved off the property. It had to be still in front, but it was pushed aside to make space for the restaurant outside of the central station here, which again asserts this kind of priority towards a capitalist market economy, and even though it's this centralized monument, still pushes it off to the side. It's very visible, people visit it. There's probably been 60 people while I've been talking who've been taking photos of it, during this recording. But to the best that the city council could at the time, they moved it slightly. And so I think even the ways in which that there is an attempt to water down and control particular memories of the Second World War and of resistance is really important to highlight, and is something that I'll be doing as I go around Oslo and the country, looking at various forms of monuments, or as the direct translation in Norwegian, memory markers, which I think is a really apt and adequate term when thinking about the role of monuments in public space and public memory. All right, hold that.